The evening sky in Iraq was painted a searing shade of orange, thick with the scent of gunpowder and dust. The scorching sun beat down on the deadly wasteland, making the silhouettes of the American soldiers in Sergeant Harold Lewis's patrol squad stand out sharply against the blistering sand. The air was dense, heavy with anticipation and breathless tension. On the narrow, rocky path winding through the deserted town, Harold signaled his team to stop for a thorough check. He was always wary of the battlefield's unusual silence. Walking close beside Harold was Major, a brave German shepherd with a coat of faded black and tan, dulled by dust, constantly sniffing, his intelligent brown eyes flashing with an extra alertness. Harold trusted Major's innate scenting abilities. Major was more than just a dog. He was Harold's second pair of eyes, ears, and soul on the battlefield. Suddenly, Major froze, his body rigid, ears pricked, snout pointed toward the bend up ahead. He looked at Harold with a piercing, anxious gaze, the kind Harold had learned to recognize. Imminent danger was near. Harold's heart clenched in that instant, his chest tightening until it was hard to breathe. "Stop! There's a bomb!" Harold shouted, his urgent voice echoing, and the whole team instantly halted in place, their breaths coming quickly and tensely. Everything happened too fast. Before Harold could process what was happening, there was a faint click, as light as a hair dropping into an abyss, right beneath his foot. The whole squad panicked as they realized he had stepped on a mine buried deep under the thick sand. Now, the life or death of the entire team hung on the terrifying stillness beneath Harold's boot. Sweat soaked his shirt. But Harold didn't dare move even a centimeter. The soldiers behind him held their breath in fear. It was a razor-thin moment between life and death, the whole world suddenly shrinking down to the space under one desperate soldier's foot. And in that split second, as if understanding Harold's predicament, Major let out a determined bark, a sound full of courage but also sorrow, piercing the taut, tension-filled air like a snapped string. Without hesitation, the dog lunged forward, using all his strength to shove Harold aside, out of the bomb's blast radius. "No, Major!" Harold screamed, reaching helplessly as his body tumbled into the scorching sand. Immediately, a deafening explosion ripped the earth and sky apart, a cloud of dust enveloping the squad. Harold's heart shattered along with the thunderous blast. As the dust cleared, Harold scrambled up, frantically searching for Major in a panic-stricken haze. His eyes were wide, desperately hoping that his friend was still alive. "Major, answer me, old boy! Major!" Harold's hoarse call mingled with the stinging smoke. Up ahead, Major's body lay motionless on the ground, his fur singed, blood dripping into the sand. Harold rushed to his loyal battle companion, his trembling hands pressing against the wounds of his precious friend. Major's eyes slowly opened, weary but shining with a strange relief when he saw Harold safe. The dog panted heavily, his body shaking with pain, but still tried to gently lick Harold's hand, as if to comfort him, to assure him that his survival was what mattered most. Harold knelt, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked, desperate face, his heart gripped in an unbearable, wrenching pain. I'm sorry, old boy," Harold whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "You can't leave me. Please." The patrol squad stood in silence, too moved to speak. They knew it was this heroic dog who had just saved all their lives, sacrificing his safety to protect his team. When the medics arrived, Harold insisted on carrying Major himself to the ambulance, his hand gently stroking the poor dog's face. Deep inside, an unbreakable vow was etched into his heart like a wound that would never heal. "Major, from this day on, no matter what happens, I'll always be by your side," he whispered into the dog's ear, his voice firm yet overflowing with love. "I'll protect you, old friend, until my last breath." Major wagged his tail weakly, as if understanding that solemn promise. His gaze, though dim, was still full of absolute trust and loyalty. On that brutal battlefield, with the sound of ambulances echoing through the smoky air, beneath the blood-red sunset pouring over the barren land, an unchanging vow was forged deep within the soldier's heart. He would never abandon this comrade, the friend who had given his own life, bearing deep wounds, to save everyone else. And that was the moment when the destinies of Harold and Major became forever intertwined, inseparable, no matter how many storms awaited them ahead. The sound of the ambulance faded into the distance, dissolving into the hazy void, and Harold jerked awake. His heart still ached, as if he'd just relived that fateful day, the moment when Major gave up everything to protect him in the brutal war. But now, instead of the blazing sun and acrid bomb smoke, Harold saw only the soft, gentle light of early morning filtering through the city park's maple leaves. He blinked several times, his calloused hand trembling as it touched the rough, scraggly fur lying beside him. A warm, familiar but faint breath brushed his fingertips, awakening a rare peace in the old soldier's heart. "Old friend," Harold whispered, his chest tightening as he looked at Major now. The once mighty battle dog was now old, frail, one eye clouded, the other barely clinging to a tired glimmer. Major curled up close to Harold, old battlefield wounds now flaring into a dull ache every time the weather turned cold. Harold's heart ached as he looked at his friend, realizing just how cruel time had been to this faithful companion. Slowly sitting up, Harold gently wrapped his arms around Major's bony body, his hand softly stroking the thin spine, careful not to touch the old scars that never fully healed. The dog breathed heavily, shivering slightly from cold and pain, but still managed to nuzzle his snout into Harold's palm, comforting the old man, reassuring him that he was still here, by his side every single day. Harold slowly took from his faded cloth bag a piece of bread, hard and stale from the day before. His stomach growled with hunger, but he didn't care. With aged hands, he broke the bread into small pieces, gently placing them before Major's nose with utmost care, as if he were offering the most precious gift in the world. "Come on, Major, eat. Today you need strength more than I do," Harold said softly, his voice full of tenderness. But Major only looked up at Harold, his clouded eyes seeming to refuse, as if urging Harold to eat first. The dog who had once saved an entire squad on the battlefield had never stopped thinking of others first. Harold choked out a smile, but his eyes filled with tears, and he gently patted Major's old head. "I know you want me to eat, but how can I swallow when you're like this, old friend? Please, eat for me." As if understanding his old friend's heart, Major reluctantly lowered his head, slowly chewing each piece of bread weakly, struggling. Harold watched every movement, his eyes overflowing with worry and boundless love. Looking around the silent park, Harold's heart ached as he realized, now, he and Major were invisible in this bustling world. Passers-by hurried past, eyes averted, no one paying any attention to the old man and his loyal dog sitting on a worn stone bench in the park's lonely corner. Harold sighed, pulling his faded coat tighter, holding Major closer to share what little warmth he had in the chilly air. Since returning from the battlefield, life had never been easy for them, but Harold never regretted a thing. He had willingly left everything, house, family, just to stay with Major, the comrade who had given his life and health for him all those years ago. "I'll never forget my promise to you, Major," Harold said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You saved my life, gave up everything for me. Now it's my turn to protect you, to care for you, until my last breath." Major seemed to understand every word, weakly pressing his head into Harold's lap, as if to say he trusted him, that he still believed in the sacred promise Harold had made. The gentle morning sun spread over Harold's and Major's aged forms, painting a scene both heartbreaking and beautiful amidst the uncertainty of life. Two beings, one man, one dog, bound by a profound friendship that rose above all prejudice, poverty, and pain. Steadfast, loyal, always protecting each other unconditionally against life's storms. On that park bench in the city, Harold sat, holding Major close, seemingly forgetting his hunger, forgetting the biting cold closing in. Because he knew that as long as they had each other, no matter the circumstances, they were the richest people in the world. Time could take away youth, health, even hope, but it could never take away the loyalty and pure, genuine friendship between Harold and Major, a friendship tested by blood, by tears, and by the unhealed wounds of that war long ago. As the warm morning sunlight still struggled to slip through the leaves, Harold felt Major's weak breathing slowly grow steadier in his arms. He was just about to close his eyes for a moment, letting distant memories lull him into a restless sleep, when suddenly the frail body in his embrace trembled violently. Major sprang up, his breathing quickening, each hot breath radiating anxiety, his old body shaking as if sensing something deeply terrifying approaching. Major's once brown eyes, now clouded, opened wide, revealing a tension and panic Harold had never seen before. The old dog shot up, ears standing alert, his gaze fixed on something far away, every silver hair along his neck bristling in warning. Harold sat up straight, his heart pounding with worry for his friend. "Major, what's wrong, old boy?" he asked softly, his calloused hand gently stroking Major's spine, trying to calm the visibly unsettled dog. "It's all right. I'm here with you." But Major stayed tense, eyes glued to the slightest movement in the distance, where cars were driving down the busy street in front of the park. For years, Harold had learned to trust Major's instincts absolutely. He understood that the old war dog's sharp senses hadn't dulled with time, but had only grown keener through years of life and death moments. "Major," Harold murmured, anxiety welling up inside him for no clear reason. "What is it you sense?" Major answered only with a low, anxious growl rumbling deep in his throat. The old dog took a few steps forward, placing his frail but courageous body between Harold and whatever invisible threat he sensed, as if shielding and protecting him from something drawing near. Harold watched more closely, trying to understand what had agitated his friend so. All his life, he'd seen Major as a shield on the battlefield. But now, on a peaceful morning in the heart of the city, no bombs, no war, Major still insisted on being the protector, standing guard with unwavering resolve against an unseen threat. "What do you think it is?" Harold asked gently, his voice as if talking to an old, trusted friend. Major looked back at him with eyes full of unease, even fear, something Harold had rarely seen in that once brave face. In that moment, Harold felt a sharp ache in his chest because he realized, no matter how much time had passed, Major's instinct to protect his comrade was still intact, fierce, and indelible. Harold hugged the dog, softly rubbing the deep old scar on Major's neck, a scar from the war, where shrapnel had once torn into him as he saved Harold's life. "It's all right, old friend," Harold whispered, his voice full of love and gratitude. "No one can hurt us anymore. We're safe now." Major turned and looked at Harold, but his eyes no longer held the courage or strength they once did. Instead, they brimmed with worry and deep restlessness, as if warning him that danger was closer than ever, almost upon them. Harold fell silent for a moment, a vague sense of dread rising inside. He knew he could always trust Major's instincts. Never once had Major's intuition failed him. Never once had he been wrong in warning Harold about looming threats. Carefully, Harold scanned the park again, trying to shake off the mounting sense of unease. But the worry and suspense lingered, like an undercurrent far beneath the calm surface, not easily dispelled. Major remained still, body tense as if ready for one final desperate fight. His old, cloudy eyes now burned with a strange resolve, as though Major was determined to protect Harold at any cost, even if his own body was no longer what it once was. Harold sighed softly, pulling his worn coat tighter around himself, gently stroking Major to comfort him. But deep inside, he knew better than anyone. Major's instincts never lied, and something terrible was waiting for them. A challenge that he and Major would have to face together, whether they wanted to or not. And in that seemingly peaceful morning, amid the city's bustle and rush, Harold suddenly realized something painfully clear. For them, the war had never truly ended. It had merely slept for a while, and now, cruelly and suddenly, it was about to return, testing the friendship and loyalty they had spent a lifetime building. Major's unease kept growing, wave after invisible wave pounding Harold's heart. Harold's hand squeezed gently into Major's graying fur, hoping to soothe the storm inside the old dog. But just then, from afar, the blaring siren of a police car pierced the park's fragile silence. Harold and Major looked up at once, their eyes full of tension and wariness. A gleaming black and white patrol car slowly rolled closer, its red and blue lights flashing garishly. A sudden warning shattering the fleeting peace they had just begun to enjoy. Major grew even more tense, his body rigid, old eyes wide, his breath coming hard, as if facing a terrifying ghost from the past. Behind the wheel sat Officer Brennan, his face cold, eyes as sharp as knives. Brennan was a man whose harsh expression never seemed to soften, wielding a small but cruel authority that could wound others with bitterness rooted deep in his soul. Next to him sat young Officer Dawson, whose worried, uneasy eyes betrayed his discomfort at his colleague's usual aggression. As Brennan stopped the car at the curb, a tiny, scruffy stray cat darted across the road in front of the vehicle. Instantly, Brennan's face twisted in irritation. He stepped out, eyes narrowing with annoyance and aggression. Without hesitation, he lashed out, kicking the small, shivering cat hard. The cat's pained cry rang out, making Major jump, his whole body shaking with a mix of fear and fury. Dawson hurried out after Brennan, clearly upset but too afraid to speak against his colleague's cold brutality. In that moment, Dawson just bowed his head, shame burning inside. Across the street, Harold could feel Major's trembling. The old dog was as tense as ever, his gaze locked on Brennan, sensing a terrible danger creeping closer. Harold bent down, gently patting Major's head, and whispered to reassure him, "It's okay, Major. I'm right here with you." But Harold knew there were no words that could calm the wild alarm now roaring inside Major. Brennan looked up, fixing his gaze on Harold, his expression shifting from cold to suspicious, full of disdain. He signaled to Dawson, and together they strode across the street straight toward Harold and Major. Brennan squinted, his voice loaded with challenge. "Hey, old man, what are you doing here?" Harold stood up, steadying himself, and replied calmly, "I'm just resting here, officer." Brennan's eyes swept over Harold and landed on Major, full of mockery and contempt. "That old dog of yours doesn't look very friendly. I think you'd better be careful with him." Major pressed close to Harold, gathering all his remaining strength to stand tall, his gaze wary and determined as he stared down Brennan. A low growl rumbled in his throat, a feeble but courageous warning, ready to protect Harold from any threat. Brennan smirked, inching even closer, eyes cold with provocation. Dawson lingered behind, visibly uncomfortable with Brennan's aggressiveness. "I need to see your papers," Brennan demanded coldly, his voice dripping with authority and indifference. Harold nodded gently, trying to remain calm under those suspicious, hostile eyes. But deep inside, he could sense something bad was about to happen. Major seemed to know it too, pressing even closer to Harold, never taking his eyes off Brennan for a second. With trembling hands, Harold reached into his worn coat for his papers, moving slowly so as not to alarm anyone. He was well aware of the danger behind Brennan's icy gaze, a policeman wielding cold power with terrifying cruelty. Major kept growling softly, his old body shaking with overwhelming anxiety, never once looking away from Brennan. In that moment, Harold remembered Major hurling himself onto a mine to save him and his squad all those years ago. Now, In this seemingly peaceful life, Harold felt a cold fear at the thought that his loyal dog might once again throw himself into danger to protect him. In the tense, wire-taut atmosphere, Harold quietly tightened his grip on Major's collar, whispering with love and gratitude, "Easy, Major. I won't let anyone hurt you, old friend." But deep in his soul, Harold knew better than ever. The real battle was just about to begin, a fight he couldn't run from, a confrontation that would test the deepest limits of friendship, loyalty, and sacrifice between him and Major. On that morning that seemed so peaceful, under Brennan's cold eyes, Harold saw the bitter truth. The war for him and Major had never really ended. It was only just beginning again, harsher, more painful, and more heartbreaking than ever. Amid that tense, anxious moment, a gentle, warm voice rang out from behind, like a cool breeze slipping through a scorching summer day, suddenly breaking the icy atmosphere Brennan had just created. "Good morning, Mr. Lewis." "Good morning, Major. How are you two doing today?" Harold turned around, an unexpected wave of relief flooding over him as he recognized Teresa Martinez, the woman who had always shown him and Major a rare kindness throughout their difficult days of homelessness. She would often walk her little dog Luna in the park, always stopping to ask after them, listening to stories no one else seemed to care about from the old veteran. Major immediately relaxed, as if he too recognized Teresa's gentle, familiar voice. The old dog slowly walked over, nuzzling his weak but trusting head into her hand. Teresa knelt, gently stroking Major's scruffy head with genuine tenderness. "Old friend, you look a little better today, don't you?" Major wagged his tail slightly, his body gradually letting go of its tension. In that brief moment, the dog had found comfort and trust. Watching the scene, Harold felt a deep, indescribable emotion rising in his heart. In this rushed and indifferent world, there were still gentle hearts out there, hearts capable of soothing the deepest pain. Brennan stood behind, quietly watching, his eyes narrowed in annoyance and suspicion at Teresa's sudden appearance. But faced with her confident, good-natured manner, he could do nothing but stand there and wait. "Thank you, Teresa," Harold said, his voice noticeably softer. Major sensed something was wrong this morning. He's been anxious, like he's trying to warn me of something. Teresa looked deep into Harold's old, world-weary yet lonely eyes, her gaze filled with sincere concern. "I believe in Major's instincts, Mr. Lewis. Dogs like him always have incredibly sharp senses, especially when they've lived through horrors like he has." Harold nodded slowly, his eyes blurring with emotion as his calloused hand gently stroked Major's back. "You know, Major isn't just a war dog. He's my comrade, my best friend. He once saved our whole unit in Iraq. He threw himself onto a bomb, risking his life just so I could make it home alive." He paused for a moment, holding back the overwhelming surge of emotion. His voice trembled, thick with feeling. "And now, when we're finally home, no one remembers him anymore. No one cares about the wounds he has to bear every day. But Major never complained, never gave up on me. He just stays there, quietly enduring it all with me, even now when he hasn't got much time left." Teresa fell silent at Harold's confession. Tears brimmed in her eyes, and in that moment she understood more than ever the unconditional loyalty and sacrifice Major had given to Harold. She gently placed her hand over Harold's aged, worn hand, smiling with empathy and solidarity. "I know, Mr. Lewis, the friendship you and Major share is truly special. It's stronger and deeper than anything I've ever seen. I'm certain that no matter what happens, you and Major will always be an inseparable part of each other." Harold smiled faintly, his heart soothed by Teresa's genuine words of encouragement. He felt grateful for her understanding and kindness, for being one of the rare people who cared about him and Major's story. Meanwhile, Major rested his head in Teresa's lap, eyes half closed. For the first time since morning, the old dog seemed to have found a fleeting moment of peace. Dawson stood beside Brennan, witnessing it all, his heart sinking with shame for what Brennan had done. But Brennan was different. His eyes remained cold and impatient. He cleared his throat with irritation. "Excuse me, but we're still conducting official business here. Please step aside so we can finish our check with him." Teresa stood up, her gaze calm and resolute as she looked Brennan straight in the eye. "I think you should show more respect to those who have sacrificed for this country. People like Mr. Lewis and Major, they deserve honor, not the contempt you're showing them." Teresa's words made Brennan frown in annoyance. He stepped forward, clearly eager to assert his authority even more. But Harold was no longer afraid. At his side was not just his loyal friend Major, but also Teresa, the person who had just given him and Major renewed faith in kindness, compassion, and understanding in this harsh, uncaring world. Bathed in the pale morning light of the park, Harold looked at Major, then at Teresa, and felt a powerful certainty rising within him. No matter how cruel life might be, he and Major would never truly be alone. Because out there were always people like Teresa. People brave enough to stand up, to protect, to understand, and to care, even when they had no obligation or duty to do so. And he knew that, no matter how harsh and painful the battle ahead might be, he and Major would remain steadfast together, strengthened by their true friendship and by the gentle understanding and support they had just received from someone like Teresa Martinez. Teresa's courageous and heartfelt words had barely faded when the atmosphere turned thick and stifling with tension. Harold felt his hand unconsciously tighten on Major's collar, sensing every weak, rapid breath from the body of his loyal old companion. Brennan's eyes darkened, his expression cold and full of challenge. Teresa's gentle yet forceful words seemed to have struck a nerve in his pride and simmering anger. He stepped forward, his voice icy. "I don't need you to tell me how to do my job, Ms. Martinez. You'd best step back." Teresa was about to reply, but Harold gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his old eyes full of gratitude but also tinged with worry. "It's all right, Teresa. Let them do their job." Reluctantly, Teresa stepped back a few paces, but her eyes stayed focused, full of anxious concern. Brennan stepped right up to Harold, his harsh gaze running up and down with ingrained suspicion. "Your papers, old man! And keep that dog away from me!" Quietly, Harold took out his worn, battered identification, his hand trembling as he handed it to Brennan. But suddenly Brennan yanked it away, purposely letting it drop to the ground, a cruel smirk on his lips. "Are you trying to make trouble for the police? Pick it up, now!" As Harold bent down to retrieve his papers, Major sensed the hostility radiating from Brennan. The old dog growled, tense, his frail body instinctively placing itself between Harold and Brennan in a protective stance that could never fade. The old scars from war still marked his thin frame, now trembling with tension and exhaustion. Brennan stepped back, feigning exaggerated caution. "Control your dog, or I'll deal with him by the law." Panicked, Harold reached out to hold Major, his voice pleading in anguish. "Please, officer, don't! He's old and weak, he can't hurt anyone." But Brennan wasn't listening. He drew his gun, his cold hand aiming at Major. Teresa screamed in horror. "Don't do it! He's just an old, helpless dog!" Dawson, behind Brennan, tried to intervene, his voice trembling with anxiety. "Brennan, calm down! The dog hasn't hurt anyone." But it was all useless. In that terrifying instant, Major looked at Brennan with strangely peaceful eyes, as if the old dog knew exactly what was about to happen. He didn't back away. On the contrary, he stepped forward, placing his fragile, failing body in front of Harold, just as he had so many times on the battlefields of old. A shot rang out, sharp as lightning, splitting Harold's heart in two. He froze, the world stopping in that breathless instant. Dark red blood spread slowly across the ground, and Major shuddered, his old body collapsing in agonizing pain. "No! Major!" Harold screamed, his voice breaking in utter despair and pain. He rushed to his faithful dog, trembling hands trying desperately to hold on to the life slipping away. Major looked up at Harold one last time, his aged eyes filled with quiet comfort and absolute loyalty. He tried to lift his head, softly nuzzling into Harold's chest, as if to say everything would be all right, that he had never regretted giving his life to his dearest friend. Tears streamed down Harold's face, mingling with the blood dripping from Major's mortal wound. His voice choked in unbearable grief, begging for something impossible. "Please, old friend, don't leave me. I need you here with me." Teresa collapsed beside Harold, her face streaked with tears. Dawson stood frozen, horror and remorse in his eyes, as he took in the heartbreaking scene Brennan had caused. Brennan silently stepped back, his face still cold, showing not a hint of remorse. In Harold's arms, Major's breath slowed, the dog's eyes slowly closing in the embrace of the friend he'd loved most in the world. Those final breaths seemed to say that, to him, dying to protect Harold was something he would never regret. Harold held Major's now lifeless body tight, his anguished cries tearing the blue sky apart. In that moment of utter agony, he realized that a part of his soul had died with Major, the most loyal comrade, the only friend he had sworn to protect for life. Silently, Teresa squeezed Harold's shoulder, trying to share in the pain that could never heal. Dawson bowed his head in shame, while Brennan stood cold and unmoved, as if nothing had happened. Beneath the weak morning sun, Harold held Major in his arms one last time, his heart shattering into pieces. For now he knew, more than ever, that his most loyal and precious friend was gone forever, leaving him to face the harsh, agonizing world utterly alone. In the suffocating air, held tight in Harold's arms, Major's body grew cold, those loyal brown eyes closing forever as he silently left behind this world of pain. Harold leaned down, placing his trembling hand on the dog's cooling forehead, his heart breaking piece by piece. A choking, desperate cry broke from the old soldier's throat. Teresa stood there, her eyes wide with stunned, silent shock. Just a minute ago, she had felt the warmth, the trust from the old dog, and now all that remained was a still, lifeless form. Everything had happened so quickly, too quickly for her to even process what had occurred. Yet it was Brennan's cruel indifference that snapped her back to this harsh, agonizing reality. Shaking, she pulled her phone from her pocket, fighting the terror tightening around her heart. Her hands trembled violently as she opened the familiar live stream app. In that moment, she understood. Though she could no longer save Major, she had to do something so the world would know the heartbreaking truth of what had just happened in this small park. She lifted the phone, her voice thick with emotion as it rang out through the live stream frame. "Everyone, please look at this scene. I'm at Central Park. Officer Brennan just shot and killed the old war dog, Major, right before the eyes of his homeless owner, a veteran named Harold Lewis. The old dog did nothing wrong. He was only trying to protect his owner out of fear. And yet—" Teresa choked up, tears streaming down her face, but her hand stayed steady, keeping the camera fixed on the painful scene. The image of Harold sitting there, clutching Major's motionless body, his shoulders shaking in hopeless grief, made the hearts of those watching ache with pain. In moments, hundreds, then thousands of live viewers tuned in, their comments scrolling in, full of emotion and outrage. "How could anyone be so cruel? That dog did nothing wrong. This is outrageous. They have to be held accountable for this." People from the neighborhood began to gather, drawn by the commotion and the sounds of anguish. The crowd grew, eyes full of sorrow and anger fixed on the image of old Major lying lifeless in the arms of his lonely, battered soldier. An elderly woman stepped forward, gently laying a trembling hand on Harold's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, old friend. We're here for you and Major." Harold looked up, his eyes red, overflowing with infinite pain. He couldn't find words. He simply nodded silently in thanks. But in that moment of sorrowful quiet, he realized that for the first time after so many forgotten months, he and Major were no longer invisible. Even in this moment of utter heartbreak, they were finally seen, heard, and understood. Brennan stood a few steps away, his expression turning anxious as more and more people gathered, their gazes on him hard with anger and accusation. Dawson looked down quietly, face full of shame, unable to speak a word. The crowd swelled, angry murmurs rising. "They can't do this to a soldier and his loyal dog!" "Show that cop's face, he needs to be brought to justice." Teresa continued to live stream, her voice growing stronger even as tears still streamed down her cheeks. "Major isn't just some old dog. He was a true hero. He saved Mr. Lewis's life and the lives of his comrades in battle, and now he's been killed like this. Who will answer for this innocent life?" The more Teresa shared Major's story of sacrifice, the more deeply moved the people became. They began to shout, demanding justice, demanding that Brennan be held accountable. Their voices rose, powerful and full of righteous anger. "Justice for Major! Justice for Harold Lewis!" Harold bowed his head, tears streaming down his weathered face, still cradling Major's body. Amidst the chaos and pain, he whispered, as if just for Major to hear, "Old friend, do you hear that? At last everyone knows they're standing up for you, Major. You're not invisible anymore, my friend." He looked around, and for the first time after years of wandering aimlessly, Harold felt the powerful empathy of strangers. Yet inside, he felt only a bitter coldness, for his most precious companion was gone forever, leaving behind an emptiness no comfort could fill. The crowd pressed closer, their calls for justice for Major growing louder. Brennan stepped back, uneasy, realizing things were spiraling out of control. Dawson's eyes were full of shame and helplessness as he stood and watched the terrible consequences of his silent complicity. Under the broad blue sky, the little park became the starting point of a wave of outrage and grief, but also of solidarity and strength, all for a loyal old dog who had spent his life protecting a lonely soldier only to die in unspeakable pain. Amidst the shouts for justice, surrounded by countless eyes of compassion and empathy, Harold clung to Major, silently promising his departed friend, "Rest well, Major. I promise I won't let your death be in vain. I will keep fighting until justice is done, my old friend." The shouts of the crowd still echoed in Harold's ears, but to him they were distant, faded sounds, like waves crashing from a far-off memory. In his arms, Major's small, old body had gone completely cold, not a trace of warmth left, leaving a chill that pierced Harold's heart to its core. "Major, please, wake up, old friend. Please don't leave me alone." Harold's voice was hoarse, his red, hopeless eyes staring at the faithful dog lying unmoving. Tears of anguish kept falling, soaking Major's worn, faded fur, mixing with the dark red blood on the cold ground. He leaned closer, pressing his cheek to the dog who had sacrificed everything to protect him, trying to hear a breath that would never come again. Harold broke into sobs, the sound tearing at the sky, drowning out even the crowd around him. "Please, give Major back to me. I can't live without him. He's all I have in this world." His grief-stricken cries silenced everyone. A deep, compassionate silence enveloped them all, as if each person, too, had lost a part of themselves witnessing this heartbreaking scene. At that moment of despair, Harold suddenly noticed a small object fall from Major's neck, a faded, old metal collar with a small tag holding precious information, a memento of Major's identity and service in the army. He reached for it, but in an instant, a cold, merciless foot was faster. Brennan, with steely eyes and no remorse, stomped down, crushing the fragile collar under his polished boot. The shattering metal echoed, bitter and cruel, like a knife driven straight into Harold's heart once more. "No!" Harold cried out in despair, his trembling hands powerless to save the last fragment of his dear friend. But it was too late. The collar was shattered into pieces, scattered on the ground beyond repair. Brennan sneered coldly. "It's just a stray dog. Nothing worth grieving over." The crowd roared louder, furious shouts and sharp accusations hurled at Brennan. But Harold heard none of it. His heart was now as shattered as the collar. Nothing in this world could mend it again. Harold clung to Major's little body, a tidal wave of pain surging inside, washing away all hope. Amid the angry cries of the people, Teresa's compassionate gaze, and Dawson's silent shame, Harold bowed his head and wept in agony. "I'm sorry, Major. I promised I'd protect you. I failed. I couldn't save you from the cruelty of this world. I'm sorry. Please forgive me, old friend." He held Major even tighter, as if to draw out some last bit of warmth from his beloved friend. His tears soaked the cold, worn fur, as if hoping to awaken a miracle he knew would never come. Teresa knelt quietly by his side, tears streaming down her face. She gently placed a hand on Harold's shoulder, her voice trembling with sympathy and grief. "I'm truly sorry, Mr. Lewis. We won't let this be for nothing. Major deserves justice." But Harold could hear nothing anymore. He only knew to hold on, to cling to the lifeless body of the truest friend he had ever known. His old eyes blurred with tears, lost in boundless pain. A soft breeze drifted by, carrying the broken pieces of the collar into the morning sunlight. The cold spread through his body, and Harold knew with aching clarity, a part of his soul had died with Major, and from now on he was alone, lost, abandoned in this vast, harsh world. And beneath that pale sunlight, amid the crowd's furious calls for justice, with Teresa working to share the painful truth with thousands through her live stream, Harold remained where he was, holding Major tight and crying out in despair, knowing he had lost everything. He had lost his most loyal friend, lost the last fragile bit of faith he had left in the world's kindness. A pain beyond words, unhealed and indelible. A pain that would haunt him forever. A bitter reminder that the world can be so cold and cruel, and that he had been powerless to protect the most precious life he had ever known. The brave old dog who sacrificed everything, only to keep his one beloved friend safe for just a little longer. While Harold still bowed over Major's cold body, on the edge of the park, Teresa fought back her grief, gripping her phone tightly, broadcasting every last frame of the tragedy. The crowd around them grew, eyes red from tears and outrage, the calls for justice growing louder, reaching farther. Within minutes, Teresa's live stream began appearing on countless groups and personal pages across social media. The image of old Major collapsing in his homeless owner's arms, the sight of Harold sobbing in despair, the angry shouts of witnesses, all merged into a wave of emotion that swept through the noise of daily news. Comment after comment poured in, not only from ordinary people, but from those who had once worn the uniform themselves. Veteran groups from across the country, from big cities to small towns, shared the heartbreaking video again and again. They called out Harold's name. They called out Major, recounting their own soldiers' stories, their losses, and the loneliness that haunted them after war. All of it awakened again by the sacrifice and wrongful death of one old dog. This isn't just about a dog. It's the pain of millions who once served this country. They deserve respect, not to be treated this way. Major was a comrade, a hero, like so many war dogs who saved our lives on the battlefield. Stand up for Harold and Major. Demand justice for them. Elderly veterans shared memories of four-legged friends who crossed life and death lines with them in faraway lands. Many sent photos, wrote tributes, listed the names of dogs who had sacrificed quietly, and now ached seeing Major fall in the heart of America, not from bombs, but from human coldness. A veteran in Texas wrote, "If it hadn't been for a dog like Major back then, I wouldn't be here talking to you now. Seeing him die like this, my heart breaks as if I've just lost family." From military forums and animal protection groups to the national media, everyone joined in. News of Major's wrongful death and Harold's strangled cries flooded social media. Hashtags like Justice for Major, Veterans Deserve Respect, and Invisible Warrior shot up the trending lists in just a few hours. Beneath each post, Thousands of comments, hearts, and crying emojis scrolled by. The tragedy of Harold and Major became the focal point for a whole community's attention. The outrage wasn't just online. Veteran groups, former soldiers, even young people who had never seen war all joined together, signing petitions, demanding investigations, and calling for justice for Harold and Major. Many organizations pledged support for Harold, offered to pay for Major's funeral, and promised to protect the rights of forgotten soldiers and war dogs. In this storm of emotion, the name Harold Lewis was no longer invisible. The image of the old man holding his loyal dog became a symbol, not just of pain, but of hope for change. Major, even in wrongful death, sparked an awakening, forcing society to confront the question, do we truly value the silent sacrifices of these small, loyal souls, those unnamed heroes who have kept alive humanity's hope, kindness, and survival? As the emotional storm spread across social media, in a small room on a Southern Army base, Captain Monique Lewis had just finished her afternoon training when she started receiving messages from colleagues and friends. At first, she scrolled past them as usual, until she saw the picture, her father, Harold, clutching Major under the shadow of a tree in the park, his thin shoulders trembling with grief, his face streaked with tears. One look, and Monique's heart felt like it was being crushed. Immediately, she opened the live stream that had become the talk of every online platform. Bathed in pale afternoon sunlight, every detail was clear. Harold kneeling over Major's body, bitter tears, desperate cries, the angry shouts of the crowd. The longer she watched, the colder she felt. She recognized every scar on Major's back, saw the little collar she had given him before leaving home, now shattered beneath the boot of a cruel police officer. In that moment, memories of childhood days with her father and Major rushed through Monique's mind like a flood. She remembered Major guarding her sleep, the old dog licking her father's wounds when Harold was sick. Everything twisted inside her into an indescribable pain. She didn't need anyone to confirm it. Just looking at her father's eyes, at Major's lifeless body, she knew she had lost the two beings she loved most in the world. Her hands shook, but her mind was resolute. Monique called her superior officer directly, her voice choked with emotion, but still carrying the discipline of a soldier who had seen life and death. "Colonel, I've just seen a video spreading on social media. That's my father, Harold Lewis, retired Special Forces, and Major, our veteran war dog. They were shot by local police in broad daylight, right in the city park. I'm reporting this as urgent and requesting immediate support and intervention from our unit." On the other end, the colonel was silent for a moment, then answered with a voice both stern and moved. "I've seen it, Monique. The entire veterans community knows. We won't let this be buried in silence. Prepare all necessary paperwork, and I'll escalate this to command and the media. Emergency response teams are being mobilized. And Monique, I'm sorry for your pain, but stay strong. Your father and Major deserve respect, and justice will be done for them." Monique put down the phone, sitting quietly for several minutes, struggling to contain the surge of emotion. Her eyes were red but shone with unwavering resolve. In that moment, every ounce of love, pride, anger, and gratitude for Major and her father came together, lighting within her the fire of a true warrior. She looked out over the base, where sunset shadows fell over the quiet grass. Out there, her old father and beloved four-legged friend were now gone forever. But in that same darkness, a new order had just been given, a mission for justice, not just for her father and Major, but for millions of forgotten souls who had been wronged across this vast country. Monique took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and promised herself, "I won't let Dad and Major's deaths be forgotten. Won't let this pain be meaningless. It's time for justice to speak, no matter what forces stand in the way." The pain of loss still cut deep into Monique's heart, but she refused to let herself collapse. Right after her report to her superior, information about the incident spread rapidly through the military's internal channels. In the brightly lit headquarters, General Hayes, a man who had known Harold since the war, personally received Monique's report. He sat silently, looking at the image of the determined young captain, who had just lost both her father and her loyal four-legged friend. "Monique," General Hayes said, his voice low but steely, "I know this is the greatest pain a soldier can endure, but right now, you have to turn that pain into strength. We cannot allow what happened to your father and Major to happen again." Without a moment's hesitation, General Hayes signed the order to deploy the Special Response Team. He authorized Monique to lead a convoy of 20 Humvees and 50 elite soldiers, men and women who had once fought beside Major and Harold on the battlefield, now reunited for honor, loyalty, and justice. As the red and blue lights flickered atop the Humvees, Monique stood on the barracks steps, feeling her heart race in the urgent night air. Though she had led many dangerous missions before, she had never faced a journey like this. Not just to protect a soldier, but to bring home a father and a loyal dog who had become a symbol for generations. Climbing into the lead Humvee, Monique gripped the steering wheel, her mind heavy with worry but burning with resolve. In her thoughts, memories of Major flashed, his bright eyes as a puppy, his stiff gait in old age. She remembered her father, Harold, standing to shield Major from gunfire, hugging the dog when both were exhausted on the field. All of it welled up as a fierce mix of pride and sorrow. She checked each weapon, each radio, instructing her team in a steady but deeply emotional voice. "Today, we're not just on a rescue mission. We are here to reclaim justice for a man who gave his whole life, for a war dog who never asked for anything but our trust. We have to prove honor, brotherhood, and loyalty still exist." The convoy rolled out under flashing lights, the engines a heavy, steady heartbeat for the dozens of people carrying their shared hope to defend what's right. In the lead Humvee, Monique clutched a small paw-shaped charm, a keepsake Harold had once given her, and which Major used to carry when they braved days of war together. Outside, the city lights up, roads gleaming and clearing for the convoy heading to the park, where Harold and Major still waited for the arrival of justice and undying love through all the weary years. In Monique's heart, the promise to protect her father and Major had never been so fierce. She whispered, as if sending a message into the void, where Major's spirit watched over the convoy. "I will bring Dad home. I will restore Major's honor, no matter what it takes." And the military convoy pressed forward, carrying all the love, pain, hope, and strength of a family of millions of hearts refusing to bow to injustice. Outside the park, as the Humvee convoy sped down the boulevard toward downtown, the atmosphere at the scene thickened with anger and grief. Videos of Major and Harold spread like wildfire, drawing an even bigger crowd around the yellow police tape. The air filled with sobs, cries for justice, stories of war dogs, of betrayed loyalty, and the pain of old soldiers who survived only to find themselves unprotected by the society they once risked everything to defend. Local police were ordered to reinforce. Patrol cars lined the street. Officers in riot gear appeared, faces tense, batons and shields at the ready. Red and blue lights swept across the faces in the crowd, some shouting in rage, some quietly holding their children, some elderly veterans trembling as they raised homemade signs reading, "Justice for Harold and Major." The standoff grew ever more intense. Chants of "Justice! Justice!" rolled like thunder, mixing with the rumble of police engines. But in the center of it all, Harold, frail, in a torn shirt, sitting on the cold cement, never let go of Major's body, not even for a moment. His aged arms held the dog tightly, Major's little form the last shield for Harold's heart, amid the storm of anger and chaos. A young officer stepped forward, trying to sound calm. "Mr. Lewis, please leave the scene so we can do our job." Harold looked up, red-eyed, his voice rough but striving for calm. "I'm not leaving. Major will not be taken away like some stray. He is my comrade, my hero, my only family." Though exhausted, his breath ragged and thin as a thread, Harold did not let go. His figure, both weak and unbreakable, became the emotional anchor for the entire crowd. A woman approached, eyes shining with tears, gently laying her hand on Harold's shoulder. A group of veterans bowed their heads in salute. Young people in the crowd gripped hands, forming a protective barrier. In his master's arms, Major's fur was matted with dried blood, but at his neck, the old scar still showed, a reminder of every time the dog had risked his life to save Harold from danger. In the flickering light of police cars, Major's eyes were forever closed, but his image was burned into the minds of everyone present that night. An old, loyal dog, quietly becoming a symbol of unconditional love, loyalty, and the silent sacrifice society too often forgets. Outside, police commanders spoke urgently on radios, the air growing more tense by the minute. The crowd only grew more determined, their chants and hopeful eyes shining throughout the park. But in the center of it all, under the flashing lights and rising storm, there were only two silent souls left. A worn-out old soldier and his fallen war dog, facing the world together, defending each other until the very end. And in that place, all pain and loss suddenly seemed small compared to the immortal bond between human and animal. A love powerful enough to move an entire society to awaken, to feel, and to demand justice for the voiceless and the brave. The atmosphere in the park had thickened with tension and grief when, suddenly, the deep, thunderous rumble of engines echoed from afar. The blue and red lights of the Humvee convoy blazed against the night, shining through trembling tree branches, making the crowd and the line of police spin around in shock, hearts pounding in their chests. 20 military Humvees roared forward in formation, tires grinding the pavement with urgency, one after another surging into the park with overwhelming presence. Each vehicle, dusty from the road, bore a small American flag at the front. Behind the glass, fully equipped soldiers stared out with eyes full of righteous fury and determination. The crowd parted instinctively, giving way to the wave of soldiers, while the police retreated in confusion, sensing an unstoppable surge of resistance. The lead Humvee screeched to a halt at the center of the crowd. The door burst open. Captain Monique Lewis stepped out, her figure stark and commanding in the Army floodlights, and under hundreds of eyes. Her face was marked by grief, tears not yet dry, but her voice rang out over the engines, steely and unyielding. "Step back. I am Captain Monique Lewis of Special Forces, the daughter of veteran Harold Lewis. You are unlawfully detaining a soldier who gave his entire life, and you have shot Major, a war dog who saved countless lives on the battlefield. Release my father immediately and allow medical and legal teams to access the scene." Monique's words exploded like a firework in the night. The crowd erupted in applause. Young veterans stood at attention and saluted her by the book. A high-ranking officer in the military unit spoke through a megaphone. "All personnel are here to support Captain Lewis. No one is to touch Harold Lewis or Major again." The police looked like taut wires, faces stiff with tension. They hesitated, but before the force of battle-hardened troops and thousands of witnesses, they had no choice but to fall back, opening a path for Monique and the Army medics to reach the scene. Monique did not waste a second, pushing through the police line and going straight to Harold, who sat exhausted, still clutching Major's lifeless body. Her hand shook as she gently placed it on her father's shoulder, and father and daughter met eyes, both filled with immeasurable pain, but also pride and gratitude for not being alone in this darkest hour. No words could capture what they felt, only silent tears streaming down their faces, trembling hands gripping each other as if afraid to let go and lose everything to the void. The soldiers quickly formed a protective circle around Harold, Monique, and Major, shielding them from all outside pressure. The medical team approached, checking on Harold. A military doctor gently placed a hand on Major's neck, bowing in silent respect for the fallen war dog. "We'll take care of you, and we'll bring Major home with the honor of a true hero," the doctor whispered, voice choked with emotion. At that moment, as the flashing lights faded and the crowd's noise subsided, memories of Major filled everyone's minds. They remembered him as a young dog, leading squads through minefields, barking warnings of danger, and dragging Harold from the hail of gunfire. The old scar on Major's neck, evidence of saving his master's life, still stood out, a mark of silent courage. Outside, soldiers and veterans began to chant in unison, "Justice for Harold, honor for Major, no one left behind." Their cries mixed with tears, with the voices of those who once shared a trench, a fear, and a loyalty that never faded. Major's broken collar was picked up with care, placed in a small velvet pouch, a sacred relic preserved for generations to come. The city's police chief and military commanders arrived, unable to ignore the moment's magnitude. For the first time, Harold was no longer alone in his circle of pain and outrage. He was surrounded by love, respect, and a wall of solidarity. Major, the loyal dog, was no longer just his symbol, but the voice of every forgotten soul, the pride of all who survived war, friendship, and courage. Monique raised her head, looking straight at the police, her voice steady and unwavering. "Today, I do not speak only for my father or Major. I speak for every soldier, for every four-legged friend who has been forgotten. We will not leave until justice and honor are restored." Amid cheers, army lights, and comrades' embraces, Harold clutched Major one more time, whispering in the old dog's ear, "You see, Major, I promised I wouldn't let you die in vain. Now the whole world knows you're my hero. Our hero." In that moment, from the sorrowful death of one war dog, a flame of unity, hope, and community power was born, one that could never be extinguished. And this was just the beginning of a journey to reclaim justice and dignity, not only for Harold and Major, but for every soul, human and animal, who had suffered silently for too many years. The overwhelming arrival of the Humvees and Captain Monique pushed the park's tension to its peak. Cries for Major's honor and justice for Harold still echoed, but at the center a new surge of anger rose as Brennan, the officer who fired the fatal shot, slowly stepped forward. The headlights lit up his uniform, glinting off beads of cold sweat on his brow. Brennan knew there was no way out. Under the pressure of hundreds of condemning eyes and over 50 soldiers standing at attention beside Monique, he squared his shoulders, head high to appear tough, but his eyes darted, searching for an invisible escape. His hand clung tightly to his badge, a last thread of the authority that had shielded him for years. A cluster of reporters edged closer, cameras aimed directly at the two main figures. The crowd went silent, only the heavy breaths of old soldiers and the pounding hearts of witnesses filling the air. Harold, still exhausted and holding Major, kept his eyes fixed on the scene before him, waiting, hoping, maybe even believing that justice would finally come. Monique advanced, slow, sure, her every step burning into the memory of everyone present. She stopped just half an arm's length from Brennan, her voice rising strong enough to reach the park's edge without a microphone. "Mr. Brennan, you claim you were just following protocol. How do you explain shooting an unarmed old dog whose only act was to protect his owner? What do you say to the image of a homeless veteran, lying in the street, clutching his most loyal friend's body, unable to look away from the gun that killed him?" Brennan froze, strange red blotches rising on his cheeks. For the first time in his life, his voice shook in front of a woman much younger than himself, but carrying a kind of power he'd never faced before. "You have to understand, I had no choice. That dog was dangerous and I felt threatened. If I hadn't acted, who knows what might have happened?" Monique didn't flinch. She glanced toward Harold, her father who, with Major, survived endless gunfire overseas, but had never been a threat to anyone in his homeland. "Threatened?" Monique said, her words as heavy as stone. This dog saved dozens of soldiers from minefields, stayed awake countless nights guarding men like you. And like me. Look, she pointed at Harold, her voice breaking. That's the only person left in this world who loves Major. Do you think your little badge is enough reason to take away a life, loyalty, and silent sacrifice like his? Before Brennan could respond, Monique reached out and grabbed the badge on his chest. The whole crowd held its breath, and as she yanked it free, the metallic click echoed like a verdict, needing no court. She held the badge high, turning so everyone could see. From this moment, you are no longer a protector of the community. You have lost the right to wear the symbol of honor you just disgraced. Never think the law can justify cruelty and lies. Brennan stood frozen, arms limp, lips quivering but silent. In his eyes now glimmered real shock, confusion, and fear, a feeling he'd never known in all his years as a cop. The crowd erupted. Many wept openly. Veterans stood in solemn lines and saluted the Major. Young soldiers gripped each other's shoulders, eyes shining as if they'd just glimpsed an old truth. Honor is not in a badge, but in action. A military medic gently placed a blanket over Major, as one would honor a fallen soldier. A little boy approached, laying a small bouquet by Major's side, whispering, "I'll never forget you." The city police chief, witnessing all, quietly stepped up and put his hand on Monique's shoulder. He nodded respectfully. "You've taught us a lesson in responsibility and compassion. From now on, no death will be forgotten." At the edge of the crowd, people held each other, tears streaming, witnessing truth and dignity finally restored for the powerless. Applause thundered, drowning out sirens, drowning out the wind in the old trees. Major, gone, but his loyal image now a guiding flame, uniting all those once lost in silence. From the loss of a humble soul, justice and humanity had been awakened, marking a new beginning for Harold, Monique, and their entire community. And in the center of that circle, the police badge lay quietly on the ground, next to Major's still form, a full stop to cruel privilege, and the start of a new chapter for compassion, justice, and the dignity of every living being. After Monique tore the badge from Brennan's chest, a silent verdict no one dared contest, the park fell into a hush, as if everyone was holding their breath, thinking the storm had finally passed. But there are truths, once they touch the human heart, that ripple outward, leaving nowhere left for secrets to hide. Just then, from the edge of the crowd, someone stepped forward. It was Dawson, the young, usually quiet officer, who had been Brennan's shadow for years. Now, his face was racked with inner conflict and pain. His eyes no longer looked at Brennan, but at Harold, at Monique, and Major's blanketed body. Dawson removed his cap, his hands trembling slightly. He took a deep breath, gathering the last of his courage, and spoke, soft at first, but growing louder and clearer, until his words drowned out the murmurs of the crowd. "I can't stay silent anymore. I'm sorry, but I can't ignore the truth. This isn't the first time Brennan's fired at a dog. Major wasn't the first victim, and he might not have been the last if we kept turning away." Shock spread through the crowd. Eyes widened in surprise, confusion, then outrage. Those who'd stood with the police began to waver. Those clutching their dogs pulled them closer, as if shielding these small lives from the danger so long dismissed. Dawson stepped forward, his words shaking, each sentence cutting through Brennan's veneer of righteousness. "I used to think he was just hot-tempered, just reacting in a moment of fear. But no. It's a habit, a warped sense of power. Years ago, I saw Brennan shoot an old homeless woman's dog at the West Market, just because it barked when he arrived. He once dragged a puppy's body out to the woods so it wouldn't disturb the public. He beat a stray cat to death with his baton, and walked away without a backward glance." His voice broke. I was silent. I told myself every cop faces dark moments, and that sometimes you have to be tough to keep control. But after today, after seeing Harold holding Major, after seeing the blood of an old dog mixing with a soldier's tears, a soldier who once saved dozens of lives, I can't bear it anymore. I was wrong. We all were. letting Brennan stand for justice. Whispers raced through the park like wildfire. Is it true? How long has this gone on? Why did no one know? Old veterans squeezed each other's hands, eyes distant as they recalled their four-legged companions, dogs who saved them from death, who offered pure loyalty without ever demanding a reward. Brennan was now nailed to a stage of conscience, his face turned ashen, lips trembling, eyes shifting from rage to real fear. He tried to shout, "You liar! You're betraying your partner!" But his voice was thin, harsh, and lost amid the rising chorus of anger from the crowd. Monique gripped Dawson's shoulder, her gaze full of deep gratitude. A silent thanks for the courage it took to drag this truth into the light. Even though it cost Major's blood and the sleepless nights of countless young officers who'd once stayed silent. Dawson pressed on, his eyes brimming with tears. "I don't deserve to wear this uniform anymore, but today I choose to stand with the truth. I hope you'll forgive my cowardice, and I promise to accept the consequences for all I've done and all I failed to do." The park erupted into applause, tears, and quiet handshakes from old soldiers to Dawson, the man who finally shattered the chain of silence that had kept justice bound for years. Brennan, nothing left to hold on to, crumpled amid shouts, the strobe of camera lights. He was surrounded by memories, every callous trigger pull, every animal's pleading eyes he'd never once truly seen. And at the center of it all, Major's still body became a gathering point for all grief, but also for hope, that no one would ever again die from neglect and cruelty. Children in the crowd whispered the story of the old war dog. Soldiers held hands and wept. Even Harold, exhausted as he was, understood that his and Major's pain had at last brought the truth to light, opening hope for every small soul the world had forgotten. In that moment, the park became a court of conscience. Outside, the sirens of ambulances, police, and the army wailed, but here all that remained was compassion, empathy, and belief in goodness, the very things Major had protected his whole life without medals or rewards, simply through unconditional love for humankind. As the shockwaves of Dawson's confession spread like an underground current through the park, breaking news began to light up digital papers and social media. Journalists who had come only to cover a police shooting suddenly uncovered a far deeper story, the story behind a homeless man and his loyal old dog. Fragments of memory were pieced together through testimonies from old soldiers, medical staff, and Harold's former neighbors. They told of a time when Harold was a skilled engineer with a cozy house on the city's edge and a quiet life after his discharge. But everything changed the night Major, the war dog who had gone through hell and back with him, quietly grew old and fell ill. Harold had gradually sold everything precious, the heirloom watch from his father, his collection of medals, even his last home, just to pay for Major's treatment, medicine, and a special wheelchair. No complaints, no regrets. He chose to sleep rough in the park to stay by Major's side, because rescue centers wouldn't allow him to care for his old, sick dog for long. He once had everything, but gave it all up to keep Major with him, an old neighbor told reporters, tears streaming down her cheeks. Major was his last friend, his whole family, his war memories, and the only reason he kept going. All over the news, the story spread. Harold wasn't homeless out of failure or misfortune, but because he'd willingly given up his entire world so he wouldn't have to abandon his old friend, the four-legged comrade who'd twice taken bullets for him, who stayed when no one else would. Many readers, learning the truth, wept before their screens. Comment after comment appeared. Loyalty can't be measured, and the love for a dog is the one thing he would never let go. A young reporter wrote shakily on Twitter, "We always ask why someone would wander the streets with an old, frail dog. But do we ever ask ourselves, could we live for love and gratitude, like Harold?" Under the soft morning light, as the breeze stirred Harold's now white hair, people no longer saw a symbol of destitution, but a quiet monument to sacrifice. a love that rose above wealth and poverty, beyond all value judgments. And beside him, though now only a lifeless body, Major became an immortal symbol for every small soul ever loved with all the heart one could muster. In that very moment, Harold and Major touched not just thousands of hearts, but planted a question in every soul watching. What truly matters most in this life, if not being together, no matter the losses and trials? After those chaotic hours in the park, as the story of Harold's sacrifice for Major spread throughout the community, the military ambulance quietly made its way through the crowd, taking the homeless veteran to the Army hospital with a silent, solemn respect rarely shown to a man no longer in uniform. Under the yellow light spilling through the glass, the image of Harold, dark circles under his eyes, silver hair, an old worn jacket wrapped tightly around his loneliness, was burned into the memories of many young soldiers who witnessed that moment. In the hospital room, military doctors hurried to treat his new injuries, bruises on his arms from being jostled, scrapes from clutching Major's body for hours on the cold ground, and the deep exhaustion brought on by days of hunger and hardship. But Harold barely noticed his own body. Physical pain was nothing but a small ripple compared to the storm raging inside. The empty, aching loss after Major's death, his only loyal friend, the last loved one left in his life. Monique sat beside the bed, no longer the stern, composed captain, but simply a daughter full of compassion and understanding. She gently took Harold's thin, wrinkled hand, listening to his slow, heavy breaths, sometimes catching, as memories crashed over him like waves. At first, Harold was silent for a long time. Outside, the footsteps of soldiers echoed in the hallway, ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, and leaves rustled in the hospital courtyard, all of it blending, only making the silence in that little room more profound. Harold stared at the ceiling, then suddenly turned to Monique, his eyes red but still glowing with pride as he spoke of Major. You know, there were nights I'd wake up in the middle of a nightmare, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like a war drum. I'd think I was back in Iraq, that out there was the sound of bullets, brothers calling each other in the dark. But then I'd see Major there, pressing his cold nose into my hand, looking at me as if to say, "It's all right. You're alive. I'm here." That feeling, it pulled me back from the abyss more times than any sleeping pill or therapy ever did. He paused, then continued, his voice slow, tinged with bitter humor. "People say I'm a failure, that I gave up on life, maybe even lost my mind just for an old dog. But if you'd ever looked into his eyes, seen how he pulled me out of the war's shadow, you'd understand. Major wasn't just a friend or family member. He was my savior. He taught me patience, forgiveness, what it means to stay, even when everyone else is gone." Monique couldn't hold back her tears. She felt that loss like a wound bleeding inside her, especially remembering Harold trembling as he held Major's body in the park, defying shouts, guns, cold, and fear. It was a moment where love and loyalty rose above all prejudice, all social order, all human logic. Harold went on, his voice rough as gravel rolling in a dry stream. "I once had a house, a wife, a job. But when Major couldn't walk anymore, I realized no one would care for him like I could. No one would understand him the way I did. So I chose the park, wandering the streets, just to wake up every morning and see him, hear his ragged breath, stroke his sun-bleached, aging fur. I don't regret it. If I could choose again, I'd do it all the same." The room fell quiet, save for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Monique squeezed Harold's hand, as if trying to give him warmth, comfort, and a share of her hope. She choked out, "You kept your promise to Major, and Major kept his promise to you. No one was left behind, right, Harold?" Harold smiled, a rare, gentle light breaking across his worn face. "That's right, dear. I never left him, and he never left me. Not for a single moment." And somewhere down the hall, a dog barked softly, as if reminding everyone that loyalty and love are real, sometimes eternal, no matter how short or uncertain a life may be. While Harold remained in the Army hospital, daily updates about the incident shook the community. But outside that hospital door, a true storm of justice was sweeping through police headquarters, courtrooms, and forums nationwide. The truth about Brennan, and the souls he'd buried under the shadow of power, was finally dragged into the light for both law and the public to see. Right after Dawson bravely testified, special investigators took up the case with unprecedented resolve. Secret recordings, duty logs, and internal reports provided by Dawson were compared, verified. Each event, each forgotten case, each terrified look from an innocent animal hurt by Brennan, each cry from the powerless silenced in the dark. The Internal Affairs Office of the Oak Ridge Police Department, once a fortress shielding Brennan from countless complaints, now became the glass cage, stripping away his last layer of protection. Images of Brennan, hair disheveled, hands cuffed behind his back, escorted before the press and federal investigators, flashed across news screens, a symbol of broken trust in once blindly worshipped authority. Prosecutors moved quickly and decisively. Brennan faced multiple charges: abuse of power, excessive force against the homeless, animal cruelty leading to the death of a service dog, perjury, falsifying records, and even covering up similar incidents in the past. Animal welfare attorneys, veterans groups, and thousands of Harold Major supporters signed petitions demanding maximum prosecution and a full investigation into every case marked by Brennan's iron hand. The media joined in, reopening old files and uncovering a string of suspicious deaths of strays, service animals, and household dogs during Brennan's patrols. Stories once thought lost resurfaced, like the orphan's puppy, the guide dog for the blind, the service dog once deployed overseas, all recalled with tears and anger. For the first time, Dawson took the witness stand not as Brennan's shadow, but as a man carrying the weight of conscience and redemption. He brought crucial evidence: shift logs, internal recordings, and hidden camera footage he'd once hesitated to surrender. Dawson did not avoid the court's gaze or shrink from lawyers and reporters. He took responsibility for his silence, but with each testimony, each detail, he exposed Brennan's path of wrongdoing over the years. I was afraid. I stayed silent to protect my career, but today I have to speak out. For Major, for Harold, for all the little souls who cannot protect themselves. The courtroom overflowed. Silent veterans in the corners, people holding their dogs, mothers who'd lost pets, children bringing their puppies to protect justice for Major. White flowers and portraits of Major were placed outside the courthouse as people quietly lit candles and prayed. Brennan, no longer a powerful officer, but a lone defendant, abandoned by colleagues and denounced by society, stared blankly, lifeless, as the indictment was read, as Dawson, once his ally, testified against him in public. On social media, hashtags like Justice for Major, Major Deserves Better, and Stop Animal Abuse spread like wildfire. Letters, videos, and poems poured in for Harold and Major, filling news sites and local TV. Schools started teaching empathy and animal welfare, and police departments reformed training with the message, "Honor isn't in the badge, but in compassion." In the end, Major, the old dog who died in his master's arms, became a sacred flame lighting up the conscience of society. Harold and Major's example woke the community so that no one could ever again ignore silent injustice or accept silence in the face of evil hiding behind a badge. This time, justice came not only to restore fairness for Harold and Major, but to renew faith for thousands who once loved, trusted, and hoped for a society where kindness and loyalty always win over the darkness of power. The echoes of Brennan's prosecution and the wave of outrage and awakening from the community were still reverberating in the press. Yet, at the small park, the very place that witnessed Harold and Major's tragedy, a quiet stream of visitors flowed from dawn until nightfall. No noise, no fanfare, only silent footsteps and red-rimmed eyes as people came, one by one, to the patch of earth where Major fell in his master's arms. It began with a few bouquets, a hastily written card. "Thank you, Major," a can of dog food. But soon the ground was a sea of blossoms. White chrysanthemums, yellow roses, purple violets, wildflowers picked from the roadside. Scattered among them, children's drawings of an old dog beside an elderly man, and a few battered toys. "So Major can play in heaven," the kids explained. Here and there were tiny American flags, a handful of old, tarnished medals, and a few elderly veterans quietly removing their caps, not in salute to a fellow human soldier, but to a four-legged soul who lived and died as bravely as any of them. One old vet whispered to the ground, as if speaking to Major, "Thank you for fighting till the very end. Thank you for keeping your promise, to Harold, to us, to this whole world." Alongside the adults, children were everywhere, one hand in their parents', the other clutching their dogs, standing quietly before the growing mound of tributes. A little girl asked her mother shyly, "If I were Major, would you stay with me like Harold did?" The mother, eyes wet, just held her child tighter, unable to answer. A second grader whispered to his father, "I want a dog, so I'll always have a loyal friend when I'm sad, like Major." People who once hurried past Harold and Major, busy, indifferent, now returned, regretfully laying down bread, cartons of milk, old toys. A widowed woman, hands trembling, set down a handwritten letter. "I used to fear dogs, but today I see that Major was kinder and more loyal than many people I know. Rest well, sweet boy." By afternoon, the air was thick with feeling. Animal rescue groups, veterans associations, teachers, artists, and local journalists all sent people to light candles, snap photos, and leave messages. Teresa, the woman whose live stream changed everything, quietly placed a photo of Major atop the flowers, with the words, "Silent guardian of the vulnerable." Then, an idea sparked by an elderly veteran. "Let's put up a small statue, right here where Major fell, not just to remember a dog, but to remind us all. Loyalty, courage, and friendship know no species. If Harold could give up everything to stay with Major till the end, then we too can be braver, kinder to every living soul around us." That suggestion spread like wildfire. Petitions, donation lists, and calls for a Major statue appeared across social media, online forums, and even on TV. Within days, thousands of signatures, hundreds of letters, cards, and drawings poured in. Young artists volunteered design concepts, an old, silver-faced dog, lying quietly beside a pair of worn shoes, a picture of loneliness, and yet a heartbreakingly gentle warmth. Community meetings, schools, and animal shelters all observed moments of silence for Major. One group of students even launched the Major's Legacy Fund to support elderly dogs, retired service animals, or homeless owners. Most touching of all was the scene when Harold, one day after leaving the hospital, was escorted back to the park by soldiers and townsfolk. The frail old man, shoulders shaking with emotion, bowed his head for a long time among the sea of flowers and tiny gifts. Harold said nothing, only pulled from his pocket Major's old collar and set it gently down, tears falling on his trembling hands. All around him, silence, sharing his pain and his pride for having loved and kept his promise to the one dog that meant everything. That night, by candlelight, a handful of children and old soldiers gathered to retell Major's story, from the battlefields of Iraq to the days wandering the park, to that last moment of immortal loyalty. And everyone realized, if Major's statue is built, it will be more than a tribute to a dog. It will be a place for each person to ask themselves, have I lived with enough loyalty, enough kindness, enough courage for the things I love? In that place, Major was no longer a stray, but a quiet flame, warming and lighting the hearts of all who passed by, inviting them to leave behind a little love, a little compassion for both humans and animals in this world. After Major's memorial, the days that followed felt to Harold like a strange, gentle dream, one he'd never dared hope for through all his years of wandering. The story of Harold, the old, homeless veteran who sold everything to keep his promise to an aging dog, and Major's sacrifice had moved hearts everywhere, from strangers to old comrades, and even military organizations who had long since forgotten him. At first, Harold still returned to the old park, sitting for hours by the flowers and Major's collar, not yet ready to let go of memory. But one morning, as he quietly arranged the letters people had sent him, Monique appeared, her face bright with hope. She handed him a new key and invited him to a small military vehicle, already full of familiar faces. Old army friends, members of the Veterans Association, even Teresa, the woman who'd shared his story with the world. They brought him to a tidy apartment in a veterans' housing community. The place was freshly painted, fully furnished, its window looking out onto a little flower garden and a big, grassy field, where Harold could spend hours watching the dogs at play in the afternoon sun. On a small table in the corner sat a photo of Harold and Major in the park, a frame engraved with both their names and Major's old collar, displayed with quiet reverence. The day Harold moved in, neighbors, mostly older veterans, men who knew loneliness after war, came to welcome him, hugging him as if a lost brother had returned. They brought small gifts, a warm kettle, a book of war stories, a painting of Major, a card with the words, "You are not alone anymore." Animal rescue groups didn't forget him either. They offered to help him adopt another old dog, if he wished, so the new home would always be filled with loyal breath. But Harold only shook his head, smiling gratefully. "I want to keep Major by my side a little longer, at least in my thoughts," he said softly. Every afternoon, he would sit on the wooden bench by the garden, quietly watching the sky streaked with sunlight, fingers tracing Major's old collar. But now, Harold was no longer surrounded by the cold loneliness of the park's night, but by the laughter of neighbors, the greetings of new friends, and the warm sharing of a small community always ready to reach out whenever he needed help. Gradually, Harold realized, though the loss would never heal, the kindness and concern he'd once given to Major was now returned to him, richer, deeper, more humane, from the very people who were once strangers. Major's sacrifice, his old dog's loyalty, had reconnected hands and hearts that were once lost, so that in the end, Harold, the man who chose to give up everything for his friend, had been brought back into a home of gratitude and kinship. And at sunset, in the quiet garden, Harold knew, love doesn't die. It simply transforms into the warmth of a community, and Major, in every breath, every glance, every smile around him, was still there, always. As Harold settled into his new apartment, still not quite used to the rare peace of a man who had lost everything, the ripples from Major's story and its lessons in loyalty kept spreading. Out of Harold's pain, a wave of conversation about justice, responsibility, and empathy for the vulnerable swept through the community. No one wanted to stop at condolences or simple remembrance. City officials, animal welfare organizations, veterans groups, and individuals inspired by Harold came together to propose something unprecedented: the founding of the Sergeant Harold Lewis Community Board, an independent oversight committee made up of citizens, veterans, social advocates, and animal welfare experts. Their goal: to ensure transparency in all matters concerning animal rights, prevent abuse, and protect the weak from unchecked power. When Harold first received the invitation, he was overwhelmed and uncertain. He never imagined his name. Sergeant Harold Lewis, once quietly stamped on a soldier's ID, would become a symbol for justice. He hesitated, afraid of the sudden spotlight, fearful he wasn't worthy, and certainly not wanting to become anyone's idea of a hero. But then he thought of Major, the old dog who had quietly been his friend, protector, and soul, when Harold was drowning in loneliness. He thought of those pleading animal eyes, of the voiceless living on the margins, of all the other heralds and majors the world had never listened to. And Harold understood. His life was no longer his alone to live quietly. On the day the new committee was announced, Harold showed up as simply as ever, Major's old collar in hand. He took the podium, his voice shaking but warm, and thanked the community for transforming pain into action, for refusing to let Major's death fade into oblivion. "I'm not a hero," Harold said, eyes fixed on the Major statue being finished out in the park. "I'm just a retired soldier, a man who couldn't leave his dog behind. But if my name can help protect the vulnerable and stop injustice, then I'll give it gladly." The other committee members took Harold's hand, vowing to work with honesty and fairness to safeguard the voices of all people and dogs alike. On that day, it wasn't just Harold who understood. The power of loyalty and kindness can overcome every fear, every shadow, to light the way to something better. And from then on, every decision of the Sergeant Harold Lewis Community Board carried Major's mark, a dog who taught an entire city that friendship and courage are never wasted. After the board was formed in his name, Harold felt he had finally found the peace he'd sought his whole life. A small place to live, a community to trust, and Major's memory honored everywhere. Yet deep down, he sensed something unfinished, the shadow of guilt and avoidance in Dawson, the young officer who'd been silent for years, whose inaction, however unintentional, had contributed to Harold and Major's tragedy. One late autumn afternoon, as Harold sat quietly beneath a tree in the veteran's residence garden, Dawson appeared, no longer in uniform, looking older and more careworn, his eyes heavy with regret. Without excuses, Dawson placed a small wreath at the foot of Major's new statue, then walked over, head bowed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harold. Sorry to you and Major," Dawson choked, his voice low and rough. "I was a coward for too long. I didn't speak up when I should have. If I'd been braver, maybe Major would still be alive. Maybe you wouldn't have suffered this loss." Harold listened in silence. The gentle breeze carried the scent of grass and the sound of birds, deepening the quiet. In his tired eyes, there was no anger or blame, only the understanding and weariness of someone who'd survived war, who had seen comrades fall because courage came a moment too late. "Dawson?" Harold replied quietly. "I know the price of silence better than anyone. On the battlefield, a moment's hesitation can cost a life. But I've made mistakes too. Let fear rule instead of conscience. If you're brave enough to face yourself and truly apologize, you've already walked halfway toward healing." Dawson looked up, tears in his eyes. Harold placed a thin, weathered hand on his shoulder, his gaze full of silent forgiveness. "I forgive you, not because I forget, but because I believe in mending what's broken," he continued, voice slow but steady. "If we live only by clutching our pain, we never grow. Major taught me that. Forgiveness isn't just freeing someone else, it's freeing yourself." There, under the tree and beside the statue of the dog that tied their fates together, two men, once divided by circumstance and silence, sat side by side. In that golden evening, Harold's forgiveness became a bridge, offering Dawson a chance to begin again and bringing Harold a deeper peace than he'd ever known on his long journey. And there, in the hush and the whispered stories of Major, a new beginning truly began, not just for Dawson, but for anyone who'd ever carried a wound, a regret, or a hope for healing. As the first winter settled over the city after the tragedy, every road seemed to lead to the small park where Major had fallen. That morning, under a clear blue sky, the unveiling of the Major Memorial drew not only locals, but hundreds of veterans, animal advocates, families whose lives had been saved by service dogs, members of the press, and children from across the region. All around the park, American flags and banners from veterans' organizations lined the pathways, and fresh flowers blanketed the grass at the statue's base. The statue, cast in bronze, depicting Major lying quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon, body aged but expression serene, became a symbol of all those loyal souls who had walked the world on 4 paws, never once asking for anything in return. The mournful sound of a trumpet opened the ceremony. Old soldiers in dress uniform stood at attention. Children held their parents' hands, looking up. Dogs, wearing white ribbon collars, sat quietly with their families. Everyone focused on the modest but dignified figure at the center of it all. When Harold stepped up to speak, a hush fell over the park. He didn't read from a script. Instead, he rested his hand on the statue's belly, feeling the cold metal pulse with memories. "I used to think loyalty was a luxury for people who had lost everything," Harold said softly, his voice hoarse with a soldier's life. "But Major taught me, and maybe all of us here, that true loyalty is simple. It's waking up each morning and finding someone still by your side, no matter if you're rich or poor, a success or a failure. It's the courage to stay, even when the price is loneliness, pain, even death." He paused, looking at the children hugging their dogs, then up at the sunlight streaming through the branches overhead. Major wasn't a saint, nor a superhero. He was just an old, quiet, stubborn dog. But in that quiet, he was strong. Strong with the power of friendship, forgiveness, and a loyalty so pure that we, as people, sometimes forget it in the chaos of our lives. Some of the veterans wiped away tears. People whispered stories about the days Major was alive, how he'd lie his head on Harold's knee every afternoon. Applause spread gently through the park, a tribute to a dog who had become a beacon of loyalty that would never fade. At the close of the ceremony, Harold carefully removed Major's old collar from his coat sleeve and fastened it around the statue's neck. Bowing his head for a long moment, he whispered, "Thank you, Major. Not just for saving my life, but for saving my soul, and for giving this whole city a gift no medal could ever match. Loyalty that is pure, unconditional, and everlasting." The applause rolled across the park, mingling with the joyous barking of dogs, a wordless ritual to honor and forever remember a little dog who changed not just one life, but an entire community. The shadows of sunset stretched across the park lawn, where Major's bronze statue quietly glowed in the last light of day. The memorial ceremony had long since ended. The crowd had returned home, and only Harold lingered, sitting silently at the statue's base among bouquets, collars, heartfelt notes, and small keepsakes from his departed friend. The gentle evening seemed to drape a velvet stillness over the wound in his heart that had yet to heal. Harold's hands, calloused from the years, trembled slightly as he caressed the ground at the statue's feet. Every grain of sand, every blade of grass seemed to evoke the memory of Major, the old dog who had silently lain by his side through days of loneliness, hunger, joy, and loss. On Harold's shoulders, it felt as though a familiar warmth remained, the scent of drowsy, aged fur he once hugged on cold winter nights. He didn't notice Monique approaching quietly from the dusk, her eyes shining with emotion and anticipation. In Monique's arms was a puppy, with dark gold fur, a white chest, and soft, floppy ears, eyes both innocent and intelligent, just like Major's in his youth. By her side walked a representative from the Animal Rescue Organization, the one who had cared for Major's bloodline after his healthy days. The two drew closer, stopping only a few steps from Harold. Monique spoke, her voice gentle but clear with heartfelt care. "Mr. Harold, today I have a small gift for you. This is Major's descendant, the last puppy from Major's lineage." Harold turned, and his tired eyes suddenly lit up, then overflowed with hot tears streaming down his cheeks. Monique gently placed the puppy in his lap. The tiny creature looked up at him shyly, then unexpectedly licked the back of Harold's hand. A gentle, affectionate lick, as if recognizing its friend, its home. He sat there stunned, his trembling hands hugging the puppy to his chest. The feeling was both new and eerily familiar, as if all his loneliness and loss had suddenly melted away, replaced by a warm current flooding his soul. Harold sobbed, not out of sadness, but from a pure happiness welling up from deep within, a joy at being given another chance to love, to protect, and to carry on the promise he once made. Those still in the park fell silent, then erupted in applause and warm cheers. A group of children ran over, petting the puppy's head and telling it stories about the heroic major of their city. The old soldiers standing beside the statue, eyes glistening with tears, placed their hands on Harold's shoulder in a gesture of deep comfort. The representative from the animal rescue organization was also moved. This puppy isn't just a gift, but a reminder that loyalty and true friendship always endure, no matter how much time passes or fate changes. Harold leaned close to the puppy's ear, whispering words only two lonely souls could truly understand. "My old friend, we're together again. I don't know if I'll be able to keep my promise one more time, but I'll love you until the end of my days, just like I loved Major." And in that moment, it was as if Major was present, in the golden sunset, in the wind rustling the trees, in the warmth of this new little life, a descendant bearing the legacy of loyalty, unconditional friendship, and forgiveness. From that day, Harold's little apartment was filled with laughter again, with the tiny footsteps of a puppy running around. Every evening, he and his new companion would go to the park, sit at Major's statue, and share stories about old times, about distant battlefields, about youth and undying loyalty. New friends, neighbors, children, veterans, even those who once overlooked Harold and Major, would now gather to listen, to laugh, to cry, and to learn how to love a little more once again. From Major's statue, the story of sacrifice, friendship, forgiveness, and renewal continued to spread. It became a living legacy for the city, a place where wounds could heal, pain could be shared, and every bond between people and dogs remained as steadfast as a river that never runs dry. As evening fell, Harold sat among his new friends, his puppy at his feet, looking toward Major's statue and whispering into the twilight. "Thank you, Major. Our friendship has never died. It's only turned into a miracle, so that every day the world might be a little kinder, a little gentler, thanks to an old dog who taught us how to be loyal, how to love, how never to give up, no matter what happens." And there, a new chapter of friendship began, under Major's memorial, where loyalty would be carried on forever, surpassing all limits of time, pain, and life itself. The story of Harold and Major closed in the gentle glow of sunset, but its echoes would live on in every heart, for loyalty, sacrifice, and the simple friendship between human and dog painted a deeply human, hopeful picture of healing. Have you ever witnessed a dog change someone's fate, or been saved yourself by an animal in your darkest moments? Share your story in the comments, because your experience may inspire others, just as Major inspired Harold. If this story touched your heart, please share this video with those you care about, and don't forget to subscribe. So together, we can keep spreading more goodness, compassion, and the power of unconditional friendship. Thank you for staying until the end, and always believe real miracles begin with loving hearts.